everyone. I'm Madison McGrath. I'm a senior IMC major here at Ole Miss. I'm from Houston, Texas, and it is my greatest pleasure to introduce to you all the president and CEO of MPA, Miss Linda Thomas Brooks.
Thanks, Madison. Thank you. Thanks, Samir.
Yeah. This is the
Perfect. Getting the tech. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Extra credit for the students who showed up for an 8 o'clock. I'm guessing that most of you have really worked hard throughout your collegiate career to never schedule any 8 o'clock class. So the fact that you're here today means a lot to me. So thanks for being here. For those of you who aren't familiar with MPA, the Association of Magazine Media, we're a trade association. We represent publishers from very large to very small independent publishers. We have sort of three prongs to the work that we do, and I'm going to really talk about two of them today. One is we do a lot of work in DC in advocacy for magazine businesses. If any of you want to talk about postal legislation, postal increases, actually the best time to talk about postal is over cocktails, but I'm willing to talk about it other times of the day as well. If you want to talk about privacy legislation, what that's doing to media companies, all those are topics that we have a small but mighty DC team that spends every day on that. If those are topics of interest to you, happy to have those conversations. It's not what I'm going to talk about this morning. There are two other prongs to the work that we do. We spend a lot of time with our magazine media company members, helping provide information and perspective that they can use when they go out and work with both consumer marketing efforts and talk to advertisers and agencies. So we do a lot of training for them, and then I speak directly to marketers and to ad agencies. So I'm going to mix sort of that information, and that's what I'm going to share with you today to talk about why magazine media matters. And if you look at the agenda, what Samir listed as a topic is a phrase that I've used sort of flippantly and now more seriously in my life, which is that I'm here at the MPA because I want to save the world one magazine at a time. And that phrase happened because when I came to the MPA just 3 years ago, I didn't have a background in this business. I've never been a publisher. I've never run a trade group. And I've been mostly or fully digital in all the jobs that I've had leading up to this. So one of my colleagues from the tech company that I was leaving said to me, Linda, why magazines? Why now? And that was the answer I gave him, mostly because I was trying to get this colleague off my back. I'm out to save the world one magazine at a time. But honestly, in the last 3 years, the time that I've been at the MPA, every morning it feels more and more like that. Because credible, sustainable journalism is becoming more and more and more important every single day. If any of you turned the news on this morning, there was a story on the news, kind of a funny flip story played in a very light way, that there's a new business dedicated to creating fake vacations. Did any of you see this? You can submit your photo, and they'll Photoshop you into whatever venue you want, right? So you can pretend you went to Paris on your spring break, or pretend that you were in Vegas doing whatever you were doing in Vegas, right? And it was played on the news as sort of a funny thing, like, you know, people are making up stories and putting this information out in social media. They want to have an Instagrammable vacation, right, whether they got to go or not. Not 3 minutes after that came news about Twitter and Facebook having to close fake accounts that other countries, other governments, and just individuals are doing to further divide our country, right? The steps between fake vacation and fake news are getting sort of shorter and shorter, right? And that's something we all need to think about. So any of you students who are thinking about, like, you know, I went to J school, I'm still thinking about law or ethics, oh my gosh, wide open, right? Because this is a crazy evolution that we're living in, and somebody needs to help us navigate it. All of that said, that's why magazines, these trusted brands, this credible information is more and more important every day. And we have what started out as a short, pithy statement, which is becoming a longer, pithy statement about the value of magazine media. And I promise I'm not going to read slides to you today, but I want to call out some of the very specific words on here because this is not just copywriting. This is really important value statement about why magazine media matters, which is that magazine media, and I call it that because magazine content lives across platforms. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about print, but a lot about that cross-platform life. Builds brands and sells product at the same time, and I'm going to show you some information about that because as I mentioned, I go out and talk to marketers all the time about the value of magazine media and what advertising does in that context, right? With proven verifiable results, magazine media is measured in more third-party, accredited, independently audited ways than any other media channel. Any other channel. And if anybody wants to talk about magazine measurement, I'm happy to have that conversation, right? But by outside audited firms, so marketers and advertisers know exactly what they're getting. In a safe and transparent environment, if you think at all about advertising, I probably don't have to tell you that brand safety is a really, really big issue right now, right? Lots of marketers wake up every day, go to YouTube or other platforms, and find their brands next to things that they do not want to be next to. And even more frighteningly, sometimes they don't even see it, but somebody else does. An environment of quality professional journalism. If that wasn't important, you all wouldn't be sitting here, right? Citizen journalism is a really interesting phenomenon. But having somebody open their laptop and tell me what they thought based on one encounter or one thing that they saw is not the same as credible, researched, edited, fact-checked journalism. And we need to continue talking about that. In an economically, ecologically, and socially sustainable society, right? So magazines are supporting us in all of those ways, and what I'm going to show you are some little snippets of the research and information that we use out in the marketplace, but also want to show you just a couple of sort of points of perspective on why magazines are different. Number one, magazines are invited guests into consumers' homes. The way that most consumers still get a magazine is that they called, clicked, wrote, sent in a blow-in card, did something, took an action, and said, here's my name, here's my home address, my physical address, which I don't share with everybody, and usually here's my credit card, or here's a check, or here's some money, right? Because I want what you, magazine editors and writers, have, whether it's recipes or home information or best ski resorts, whatever it is, I'm opting in. Because I know you're experts and I want that, right? That's different from all these other tech environments. And remember, I came out of tech, I get it. Tech is great at some things, I'm going to talk about that. But a lot of what we're calling advertising environments in tech are push, right? Me pushing a message to you, right? If I had one of the coders from my tech team here with me today, I'm pretty sure that I could ping your phone, even if you're not on it at this moment. And when you walk out of here today, I could send you a message, right? That's not even a heavy lift from a tech perspective. But your phone is a very personal device, and you didn't necessarily invite me onto it. So what's the most likely response if I send you a message that you don't want or you don't even know who I am? What are you going to do? Swipe off, right? Delete. Exactly. So magazines are that invited guest into consumers' home. And Stephen talked about this a little bit last night. Like somebody just wants a glass of wine and to sit with their magazine, they save it, they savor it because they've invited that experience into their life and it's important to them. When I talk to advertisers, what I remind them is that they get to come along as the invited guest inside that magazine. Advertisers are the plus one to the magazine invitation. The other thing that's important is the idea of contextual relevance. If you spend time with ad agencies, what you'll know is that we have gone through this period of time where we talk about all audience as the same. Audience is audience is audience. It doesn't matter where you get them. We're looking for scale, and mathematically that works. The problem is it doesn't work in the real world. That's not how people are influenced. And I know you're going to hear lots of cool things about neuroscience today, right? It's not how people are influenced. And so what's happening is advertisers are spending money in these environments, but they're not having sales effect. They're not growing their businesses, right? So that contextual relevance is a really important element, which is sort of being remembered in the industry right now. And the way that we describe what you do, we have spent, I don't know how many hours, at the MPA talking about the language that we use to talk about magazine media. And one thing that we talk about all the time is this word content, right? Which we all hate. We just haven't really come up with a better one, to be honest. The problem I have with the word content is that it equates the amazing investigative reporting that Ronan Farrow does in The New Yorker and my 14-year-old's Instagram posts. And I'm telling you, they're not equal, right? But content gives everything equal footing. So we've come up with this sort of very long adjective that we now say so quickly we run it all together. Somebody said to me the other day, it's sort of like you're saying supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. You guys remember that, right? It might be too early for you, right? Professionally researched, written, edited, produced, curated content. That's what you all do. That's the value that you bring to it. And in this environment where there's a lot of citizen journalism, there's a lot of opinion that's not differentiated from reporting, people have said to me, well, Linda, people just have to read content with a critical eye. They have to think about where it came from and what the sources are. And I understand that. I was one of those students too. I went to J school. I know what constitutes good reporting. I can look at a story and say, how many sources, what was their expertise, who did they quote, how long has this reporting process been going on? I get that. The problem is, I now have a day job, and I have a family, and I have other things going on in my life, so it's hard enough to make time to actually read that content. I can't read every story and think about what's the background behind it, right? So what I need to do is go to those trusted brands that I know have done the homework for me. And I know they have this element of expert curation, right? That's the shortcut to quality that known media brands provide to consumers. I know there's lots of you up there. I have kids, so I'm very used to interruption. So if you all want to come down and have a seat, you're not going to derail me. So come on down, get comfy, because we have so much to talk about. I mentioned neuroscience, and I'm not going to belabor that. We could have a whole dedicated session on neuroscience. Oh wait, we're going to have a dedicated session on neuroscience. So I'm not going to belabor this because I think the information that we have and the information that Danielle uses are very much overlap. What I will say is that there's hard science behind why your brain does what it does or doesn't do what it's not doing, right? And a lot of this is about learning outcomes. And this is a fascinating, evolving area to me, and I see this all the time. There, again, news this morning. You can tell I went to J school, right? I'm a news junkie. It's the first thing I do in the morning. News this morning about Silicon Valley funding technology platforms for schools in Kansas. Well, that's fascinating because guess what Silicon Valley is doing? They're taking the tech out of their schools because it's not having the learning outcome that they want. So I go to talk to marketers. I went to talk to a marketer not that long ago, and they said, Linda, we're in the middle of this transformation. We're going to become a digitally led company. I was like, okay, number one, you're about a dozen years too late, right? Welcome to the world. Secondly, what they said is we want to emulate Silicon Valley, right? Silicon Valley, and if you follow the press, they're taking the tech out of schools. There was a fascinating story in the New York Times before the holidays about nanny contracts. In Silicon Valley, if you want to get a nanny job in Silicon Valley, you had to sign a contract that said you wouldn't use technology in the presence of the children you were caring for. Not just that you wouldn't give it to the kids, you literally wouldn't use it in the presence of the children because it's causing attention deficit issues and because kids are not learning in those platforms, right? So I know you're going to hear more about the sensory input, and that's really important. Tech is great at some things. What it's great at is quick hits of information. It's also good at quick hits of dopamine, right? Which is why you're all addicted to your devices. But if you just want a quick fact, right? What time is my meeting? What's the score of the game last night? Did the Blazers win on that, buzzer beater, whatever? Tech is great. But what happens is that your brain is just looking for that little piece of information. It's ignoring everything else on the screen or on the page, right? So you're not getting the impact of that learning. So for those of you who are still in school, anytime you're struggling, go get it on paper. I'm telling you, it will make a difference in your career. Okay. Magazine, in this case, and some data I'm going to show you is specifically about printed magazines, right? Magazines in one particular format, is also great at creating a benefit for the marketers who support it with advertising. And what I have to show you is a compilation of research by a company called Millward Brown, which many major marketers use. It's the premier market mix modeling company in the US. They did a roll-up of over 150 case studies that they did directly for marketers. So the MPA did not commission this research, and I think that's really important to say, because when I go out and talk to marketers, if I say the MPA did research that shows magazines are great, the answer would be, of course the MPA thinks magazines are great. That's what we do, right? But in this case, we have all these outside resources pointing to the fact that magazines are effective. So Millward Brown studied 150 different brands in 4 categories: automotive, consumer packaged goods, financial services, and entertainment. 4 very big marketing brand categories. And what they found, these are all what marketers call upper funnel metrics, right? Different measures of awareness. Did the consumer become more aware of the product or the category that was being advertised based on that specific magazine ad? And the way you read Millward Brown charts, marketers sort of inherently know this because they use their data all the time. The x-axis is the base level for each particular key performance indicator, right? And the bars are the percent lift. If you ever read Millward Brown, they always refer to it as the delta, right? How much better did that particular indicator get when you had those media mixes? Does that make sense? You following me? Okay. And you can see in each one of these sets, the 2 bars on the right are where you have print in the mix, sort of that light gray or light blue, I guess, depending on how you're looking at it. You have print and television together. And then the far bar in each, you have all 3 media choices, online, print, and TV, working together in that media mix. And what you'll see in every case, having magazines, printed magazines, in your media mix helps you drive every measure of awareness, including, interestingly, TV-specific ad awareness. So when I go out and talk to marketers, what I can say is your television advertising will be more effective if you have print in your mix as well, right? Now, most marketers sort of get this because they think of printed magazines as a great driver of awareness and consideration. But here's where it gets interesting. Millward Brown also looks at lower funnel metrics down to purchase intent, so literally asking consumers, did they intend to purchase the advertised product? And you can see the biggest number on either of these 2 slides is the lift in purchase intent when you have magazines in your mix, right? So remember at the beginning, and I said we have that one statement that encapsulates magazines, and I said magazine media builds brands and sells product, builds brands and sells product, according to Millward Brown. And for any of you, and I see people snapping pictures, which is totally fine. Also, if you are interested in this and you go to our website, which is magazine.org, all this information is shared and available to the public. So you can go, the entirety of this study is maybe 12 or 15 pages. So you can see all the background and also the details and the methodological information, if that's important to you. Okay, one other resource comes from Nielsen Catalina. Nielsen Catalina, for those of you who don't know, is a joint venture between Nielsen, the same people who measure television ratings, and Catalina, which is a loyalty card company that literally tracks purchases in store. So Nielsen Catalina, because of their methodology, they track purchases at grocery or mass merchandisers, right? Those are the only categories they use. Leslie Wood, who just won an enormous industry research award, she's the chief researcher at Nielsen Catalina. She rolled up a study of over 1,400 client studies they'd done. So there's a massive amount of data here. So she was looking at exposure to advertising and then sales that resulted from that. And here's what Leslie and her team found, which is that magazines had a $3.94 return on every dollar that a marketer invested, right? And you didn't really have to get too far beyond Econ 101 to know that if you put $1 in and you get $3.94 out, you're having a really good day, right? Marketers are very interested in this because CMOs often have their personal performance and sometimes their personal financial bonus predicated on numbers like this, right? So this is a really good day. So two things are important about this chart. Number one, massive amount of data, over 1,400 studies, right? So I'm not coming in here with one study and saying we look really good, right? Studies put together by Nielsen Catalina, not by us. The second thing is look at the difference between magazines and everything else, right? So I spent most of my career on the other side of the desk. I was a marketer and an ad agency person, and I always had people coming in to show me research. And I often had people who would come in with a chart like this, and they'd say, look, we're number one, 394. And the next thing on the chart would be like 392. And I'd be like, come on, guys, really? All you students, make sure you paid attention in stats. You're going to need it, right? But look at the difference between magazines and everything else, right? Massive ROI. The other thing that magazines are good at is collecting this data, but it's being used for advertising, truly advertising, moving minds, exposing people to different messages. In the world that we're in right now, we've started to conflate advertising with direct marketing because everybody's using data for everything. And direct marketing is fantastic at certain things. If I know that you're going to pass a Starbucks at 2 o'clock and I know that you drink whatever, a mocha latte, and I know that you need a jolt before your 2 o'clock class or meeting, and I can send you a message, that's great. But that's not really advertising, that's direct marketing, right? And we've started to conflate those ideas. What magazines are great at is sharing information, exposing people to different ideas, inspiring them as well as informing them, right? As opposed to being that pesky data thing that's following you everywhere. I was telling, I think Samir last night, I had this very funny experience just last week. Somebody I know who's a marketer at a big auto company, where I spent a lot of my career, was in New York for the New York Auto Show. And he said, hey, come meet me, let's catch up. And of course, I was running late, and so as I was trying to get across town, I was texting him, and he was like, look, I'm gonna dip into I was in the hotel lobby waiting for you, I'm gonna dip into the bar, I'll go have a drink, no sweat. So when I walk into the bar, he's got this look of terror on his face. For somebody to be more pale than me is kind of remarkable, and he was. And he said, Linda, I just had this weird experience. The guy next to me ordered a Stella and was telling me how good it was. I've never had one in my life. I've never interacted with an ad. I was influenced by the guy next to me at the bar. I ordered a Stella, and because I was waiting for you, I picked up my phone to kill time, and Facebook fed me a Stella ad. The only way that Facebook knew to feed him a Stella ad was through the microphone. He was not on Facebook before he picked up that phone, right? Data is a very dangerous and slippery slope, right? Okay, so when we talk about advertising and we talk about marketing and we talk about influencing people, in the traditional marketing sense, this is what we call upper funnel, right? Influencing people. When marketers think about how to influence vast numbers of people, scale, the favorite word of marketers, we need scale, they often think about television, right? Linear television still has very big audiences. And I was at a conference and I got to present after Linda Yaccarino, who's the head of sales at all of NBC's networks. And she was talking about all the fantastic work that NBC does, and they do have fantastic shows. And it was great for me to follow her because I got to say, look, she's exactly right. NBC has great programs and great ratings. They have really big consumer reach. It's really big. It's just not as big as magazines. What we have here is the top 10 television shows from the last complete Nielsen season. We took the Nielsen rating for 18 to 49, so a pretty young demo. For any of you who are into media research, we converted it to GRPs. And then we took the magazine audience numbers. By the way, these are print only. This isn't the total footprint of the brand. Print only audience number from MRI. We converted that to GRPs so that we had comparable basis, right? And what do you see? All 10 of the top 10 magazines, according to MRI, beat everything on television, including the NFL. A message from above. we've been doing this chart. I mentioned I've been at the MPA 3 years. We've been doing this chart since I got there because this is the kind of information that I used in my past life. The first year we did it, 6 out of the top 10 magazines beat everything on television. The second year, 7, and now 10, right? So I'm projecting the kind of conversations that your students might have when you go home or when you talk to your friends or when you talk to people on campus and you tell them you're a journalism major, you tell them you're studying magazines, right? And did they universally jump up and down and say, magazines are the key to the future, we're so glad you're studying that, right? Even a few years ago when I was in J school, I sometimes got that funny look, including from my parents, right? Who are like, what is the future of journalism, right? So you can trot out some numbers, right? Because you have the potential in the magazine business to reach more people than the NFL on a weekly basis. That's a pretty good deal. At the MPA, we do a study called Magazine Media 360. On a monthly basis, we track total audience to our member brands, like ESPN, one of our fine member brands. Get the thumbs up from the ESPN team. We take the most recent MRI number, which is print. We add that to ComScore and Nielsen to look at the audience and their digital platforms. And we just put all that information together. To be honest, it makes life easier for marketers and ad agencies. It's a lot of work. And we put that information together. I tell you that because I want to show you what's been happening. The MPA has been doing that 360 report since the middle of 2014. Here's the longitudinal data since that time. That red line in the middle is, you'll see the legend says print plus digital. That's because that's the way that MRI measures it. They measure print plus digital replicas, right? Digital replicas are a really small number, kind of a rounding error, right? That was sort of of the moment when we all thought everybody was going to read their magazines on a tablet, but that's not how people actually want magazines, right? So that's mostly a print number. The kind of yellowish gold line on top is total audience. So what magazines have been great at is keeping their print audiences robust and growing all these other platforms, right, with complementary information, mobile web, desktop web. That's the only number that's coming down, right, because people can't be bothered to go all the way to the big screen when they have a little screen in their pocket. And video, that purple line on the bottom that's coming up, which is off of a small base but growing by leaps and bounds, right? All those add up to that number on top. So the measured magazine media brands are showing this really robust growth in a very, very crazy media environment. And that's really important to remember. So take students, if your parents are hassling you, give them those two charts, right? Tell them you're in a very robust area. I wanted to give you a couple more examples because people sort of forget the power of brands. We hear all the time the power of influencers, right? And people will say like, oh, that influencer has, 10 million followers or, an audience of 10 million. Okay, well, how does that equate? Let's look at the current state of just a couple of magazine examples that we pulled. 3 stats here, monthly circulation. So that's copies. That's literally printed copies that go out. By the way, that number is audited by an outside independent firm. So it's a validated number of the number of print copies going out in the marketplace. The monthly audience to those print copies from MRI, another third-party accredited source that looks at the audience that is attracted to those monthly copies. And then the number at the bottom is our Magazine Media 360, which adds the print audience to the mobile, social, digital, right? Those numbers that I showed you on that chart, to look at the total power of those brands, right? So Stephen mentioned last night Better Homes and Gardens, which is coming up on 100 years old. I had the opportunity to go to a meeting with some financial analysts with Steve Lacy, who is the chairman of Meredith that Stephen Orr mentioned last night. And Steve stood in front of those analysts and said he had been at Meredith, I think, 17 or 18 years. And he said, when I got to Meredith, we were mailing 7.6 million copies of Better Homes and Gardens every month. And he said to the analyst, how many copies do you think we're mailing now? And being financial analysts, masters of the universe, they had all kinds of answers, none of which, by the way, were 7.6 million, right? Better Homes and Gardens still has that amazingly robust audience, 7.6 million copies put out every month, and you can see that the audience they're amassing. So the power of our brands is really across platforms. And the way that the brands use the platforms differs depending on what the audience wants, right? So some of our brands are more into Instagram, or if you're Cosmo, they drive a big audience on Snap. Better Homes and Gardens, I don't think spends too much time on Snap, completely appropriate to their audience, right? But the total footprint of these brands is really enormous. And again, that's important because we get asked all the time about influencers, right? And the power of social media driving things. And we got asked that so many times, I started asking people to describe an influencer for me, right? When marketers would say, we're going to stop advertising so much, we're going to do influencer marketing. What is an influencer? Well, somebody who really knows their stuff, somebody who has a following, somebody who people trust. And I'd say, I think you just described a journalist and an editor, right? But it made us go take a look at the numbers and see if we could quantify the power of magazine media brands in social media. So we did a report which is now issued quarterly, another report that's open to anybody who wants it on our website. And we compared magazine brands on the social channels to non-magazine brands in the same editorial category. So I'll show you women's fashion and beauty. So in dark blue, magazine brands, so think of brands like Allure, Harper's Bazaar, Vogue. And the light blue, non-magazine brands in the same category, so think about Refinery 29, Who What Wear, Fashionista, right? And what these numbers reflect are the number of times that those in each brand post new content on the 4 big social channels on a monthly basis, and then the number of times that a consumer does something meaningful, share, retweet, comment, something where as an individual you're attaching yourself to that content, right? And then we just divide one by the other. It's just math, it's just a lot of data, right? And what we see in almost every one of the 26 editorial categories that we measure, in almost every single quarter, we've been doing this, about a year and a half, is that magazine media brands have vastly more social influence than those non-mag brands. And why? In part, that goes back to consumer trust, right? If I'm going to share information or retweet or make a decision based on it, I want to know that people actually formed an educated opinion about that before I share it out in the world. And that's becoming more and more important because what people found in a lot of social activity is that they were sharing information that was later found out to be completely false. Have you ever seen this? If somebody posts something and then somebody else will comment underneath it, like a link to Snopes, like, look, we checked this out. What you shared is complete BS, right? That's a bad moment, right? So that inherent trust in these brands is really important, and it's playing out in social media in a very big way. And here's just another category: health and fitness and women's service. We're doing another thing. We're actually in beta, and we're about to roll out yet another set of analysis, because what we found is that not only did the marketers want to know about the power of social media, but they were really trying to figure out how to quantify what was happening in the other online channels. So we're about to roll out a new online engagement report, which looks at attributes of engagement that marketers find important. So things like loyalty, immersion, intensity are things that we can track and measure based on how people are interacting with different media channels. So you can see the frequency with which a consumer comes to your magazine media brand, how much time they spend with it, right? Because again, if you're just doing media math, you can get an audience from a 6-second unit or a 2-second mention, right? But if somebody's immersed in a story that you wrote or immersed in the advertising that's adjacent to that versus a 2-second appearance of 50% of the pixels on your screen, right? Those are different things. So let's look at amount of time and then intensity, right? The amount of exposures within a period. MRI measures something called average page exposure, which is how many times the consumer sees the average page in a magazine. We're looking to extend that kind of average exposure into these online channels. So all of these have a way for us to actually get to the math You can see visits, or sessions, minutes, and videos. So this report is in beta. We've been testing it with some of our agency and marketer partners. We're about to roll out the real data. What I've seen so far validates the power of magazine brands in all of these channels. And in a media world that's getting more and more and more full every single day, that shortcut to quality is a really important thing, and it's why we're getting this kind of engagement with consumers. So you can look for hopefully more news about this soon, or we're happy to talk about this. I'll be around for the rest of the conference. We're happy to talk about this, but the numbers validate the power of these brands, right? The other thing that's important is the consumer trust, again, that goes to our brands, and part of that is because magazines have been collecting consumer data for a really long time. If you subscribe to a magazine, they already know where you live, probably your email, and they have your credit card information, right? But they've been guardians of that data in a very different way than a lot of online channels, and that's a really important issue that is coming more and more to the forefront every day. And we see consumer trust really reacting to what's been happening out there in the marketplace. Some of you have probably seen the Edelman Trust Study. If you haven't, it's a really interesting sort of sociological study. Edelman, which is a big PR firm, a big holding company, has been doing a study. They look not just at media, but other societal influences, clergy, government, et cetera. They've been doing this globally and longitudinally for years. Again, not commissioned by the NPA. We just think their work is really well done. They unveiled the most recent version of their study at Davos this year, so back in February. And if you follow traditional media, is this blue line that had sort of tucked down for a few years, it has come back up in terms of consumer trust, right? Search engines, online-only media, social media, owned is holding or going up. Everything else is trending down. Why is that? Because it's getting to be a very weird world out there, right? I was involved in online media and digital media since the very beginning. I was sitting in Detroit as an automotive marketer, and I remember having very earnest, like late night conversations with people talking about, won't it be amazing when these platforms allow unfiltered information, right? When there's no publishers and no middlemen, and anybody who has something to say can say it. And in the early days of that world, in the early days of that tech revolution, and probably in our naivete, we could only see that that was a beautiful thing, right? So fast forward a lot of years, what's happening out there? Anybody who has something to say is saying it. And there's a lot of unformed opinions. And I think we've seen as a society a lot of issues that have come to the forefront, whether you want to think about interference in election or measles epidemics, where people are making decisions on incomplete or just sometimes completely erroneous information. And consumers are getting increasingly worried about that. And again, trying to figure out who they can trust. So this trust in traditional media is a really interesting trend. And prediction, I think we're going to see that number go up as we start to see some additional fallout and continued investigation into some of these other channels. The other thing that's interesting that we've seen in magazines is just the power that magazines have. So, there's been endless case studies about all these new direct-to-consumer brands. Airbnb, right? A company that had no capital expenditures, didn't own any properties, came out of nowhere, became the darling of the new economy. About 18 months ago, Airbnb said they wanted to make a strategic change in their business. They wanted to go from being a transactional company, right? I'm going to Oxford, I need a place to stay, to being an inspirational company. What would make me want to go to Oxford? Or what would make me want to adopt a traveling lifestyle? Their number one strategy to make that business transformation was to launch their own magazine, which they did in partnership with Hearst. And all of these brands, Facebook, Uber, Casper, the mattress company, after you buy their super expensive mattress, you still have to pay $12 to get their magazine, right? But all these brands have started to stake their growth and their credibility on this legacy format of printed magazines. And some of them are incredibly well done. We did a campaign last year to talk about the amount of fake content that's out there. Susan Ross, who's here from my team, and her communication teams have won multiple awards, industry awards for this campaign. Incredibly well done. Just to call out the fact of that, again, that professionally researched, written, edited, produced, curated content. And what we see, again, is that increasingly we want to highlight the power of that. That's really important, not only to our business and the success of our publishing companies, but to us as a society. I think in our industry, we have a real opportunity right now to do something that's incredibly important, right? People have written books about the death of expertise and the fact that, you know, everybody has an opinion, and we need to stand up for informed journalism, credible journalism, whether that's on lifestyle issues or news or anything. And that's what magazine brands are doing. So that's why my job is so much fun every day, because when we put our feet on the floor in the morning, we're fighting for something that's bigger than, you know, an ad page or some digital ads or, you know, a quarterly number. We're really fighting for the future of something that is so important to us. What's fascinating to me is that advertisers have started to figure this out. And it's funny, this wasn't called to our attention in any formal way, but I was running out of the office one day. I was headed for the airport, and I do what I always do when I run out of the office, which is grab a stack of magazines. Because if you're going to be 33rd in line for takeoff at LaGuardia, you might as well have the New Yorker with you. It's going to make your day better, right? And so I was flipping through the New Yorker. In the back of the issue, there was this 1/3 column ad tucked way in the back. We reprinted it just so you can read it. The advertiser, who is a winery, was thanking the reader for supporting challenging, reflective, rational journalism, right? So now the loop starts to close because advertisers understand what they're doing, and the readers who also support that are all supporting this journalism that's so important to us as a society. Okay, so everything that's in here, I gave you at least one little snippet of research to prove. There's lots more research on our website, which we make accessible to everybody, because I think it's really important for us to share that with the industry. I'll also be around for the next couple of days, as will Susan. Raise your hand, Susan, if you haven't met Susan yet. Susan is our communications director from our team. Either one of us can answer questions. Lots of research to validate this, right? We've got it all. So if you haven't heard enough of us, we have a conference coming up in a couple weeks in Charleston, another beautiful place to visit in the spring for our independent magazines. Not only will we be sharing information, but our magazines share with each other. Donna, who's here, is one of the key members of putting that content together. So we have some information out on the table, or see one of us. We'd be happy to welcome you, and I'm happy to answer maybe one question now, one or two, and then, as I said, I'm around for a couple days. So hopefully you walked out of here energized, inspired, and ready to go save the world through magazines.
Question?
You talked about print. Do newspapers figure into this equation, or is it a magazine-only focus? Where do newspapers fall into this great scheme of things?
Yeah, question, if you can hear in the back, is about newspapers. So some of the information we have is literally about printed format, so that neuroscience applies to that. For instance, the advertising research, there's not really enough newspaper in those samples because they're typically not national brands or local brands. There's a newspaper association, an analogous association, who pulls a lot of that information together. I think sort of writ large, if you think about the trends, they certainly apply, but the data that I showed is specific to magazines for the most part. But another, obviously, an important topic in sustaining that credible journalism.
One final question.
Extra credit for any student who has questions, right? Or Jim.
Your perspective as a former agency person, aren't we kind of coming back in a circle? You want to comment?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Jim just asked, so my background is agencies and marketers. Are we coming back in the circle? Yeah, absolutely, we're coming back in the circle. The ANA, which is the Association of National Advertisers, monitors about 400 consumer brands, and what ANA's studies have found is that in the past couple of years, advertisers have been spending either the same amount generally or even more on their advertising budgets, but they're not having business success, right? And I get asked to come into advertisers and agencies all the time, usually with this data as a lead, but I get people who ask me because I've written, I don't know, probably thousands and thousands of strategic communication plans in my career. So we see that people got really addicted to sort of the numerics of audience, and it's cheaper if we can just buy them in mass, but they didn't see business success as a result of that. So it's making people really examine the core metrics, the KPIs for their digital spend, and really thinking about what they need to do in the marketplace. Again, I talked for a minute about the difference between advertising and direct marketing. Those are both very valid disciplines, but neither one does the job entirely on its own. And what we saw with the swing to the digital tactics was sort of over-reliance on direct marketing tactics without any advertising. So for instance, my friends in the automotive business will tell you their repurchase cycle, the time from which you purchase one car and then you purchase another, is running about 60 months, 60, right? So that's a long time. And what they've been able to do with digital tactics is really do a lot of targeting for the end of your purchase process. So when they know you're already shopping and they can sell you price or availability or a better model, but what they under prioritized was all the antecedent measures of trying to explain to you why you should buy their car, right? So in automotive marketing, it took them about 5 or 6 years to figure out they had a problem, because that's how long the purchase cycle is. And what they're all finding out now is that they spent too much time in lower funnel, but they didn't put anybody in the top of the funnel, right? So if you can only sell the people who are already there, but you haven't shown anybody else a reason to buy your car, you've got a really big problem. And the fantastic thing about our data, because there's no marketer in the world who's going to go back to their CEO or their board and say, like, oops, we messed up. We didn't give anybody any reason to come buy us. So don't hold us accountable for sales, because we have to build brand, right? If you're a CMO, you're going to have a much shorter life than you already have if that's your thing. So that's why it's so important when we talk about building brand and selling product at the same time, because magazines uniquely, according to Miller Brown, not according to us, are the single best media channel to do both those things at the same time, and that's what marketers need.
Thank you. Thank you.